My name is Sabria Balland, and I am with the National Organization Committee of Texas with the People's Party. In December of 2021, one of the contractors of our party accused the National Chair Nick Brana of sexual harassment. Brana denied the accusations. Today, I'm joined by Nick and two of our board members who were in charge of the investigation. We have Nick Brana, National Chair of the People's Party, Michelle Ramirez, board member and chair of the partial board during the investigation, and Dave Maisel, board member, investigator during the investigation. So I would like to start with you, Nick. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. After a consensual relationship with an individual who was a contractor with us that lasted about 4 months, the individual accused me of sexual harassment and charges that later escalated. Those accusations weren't true. And I'd also like to say that at the People's Party, one of the things that has made me the most proud to work here is that from our very first day, we've always had an amazing group of revolutionary women who have been in the leadership and among our volunteers in the party. The party has a strong commitment to women's issues, whether it's expanding funding for WIC, whether it's abortion rights, and whether it is the Equal Rights Amendment. All of these are in our platform, and we're proud to support those issues and proud to have all of those women in our leadership and among our volunteers. Yeah.
Okay. What happened leading up to the sexual harassment accusations? And Dave, if you'd like to tell us.
Absolutely. We were presented with the allegations of sexual harassment on the 8th of December, 2021, as the full board, as it stood at the time, including two members who had been previously inactive on our board, were brought in to go and review the allegations that were brought against our chair. At that point, under legal counsel, we had appointed a special investigative committee to look into the allegations, to get testimony from both the accuser and accused, as a fact-finding mission to find out whether or not the allegations that were levied against Nick Brana were, in one way or another, had merit or had substantiation. So the purpose of the special investigative committee was not to determine guilt or innocence, but to substantiate the evidence that was being brought forward as we'd received a written statement from the accuser to the entire board. At that point, as I said, we had a special meeting of the board, minus Nick, to ascertain the composure of that special investigative committee. Under legal counsel, I was a member of the special investigative committee, as well as two other board members, both female, and all of us with experience with sexual violence, unfortunately, were brought to go and review these very serious allegations that were brought against Nick.
Okay. Michelle, what happened when the contractor brought the sexual allegations against Nick?
Well, at this time, obviously, this is something that we took very, very seriously. Any kind of claim like that, I think any organization has a responsibility to really have an investigation and really see if there's merit to the claims. I was personally contacted by a previous board member once the claim had been brought, and it happened to be just a couple of days after my dad passed away. It's a very difficult time, but again, it was something very important to get to the truth of the matter. As much as I have, worked with our chair, with Nick, for a long time, and would not have thought that would be something that he would ever done. Certainly not in line with the character that I'm familiar with Nick. Nonetheless, I put that working relationship aside and really took a look at, we all really took a look at the evidence and tried to see if there was any substantiation to the claims. Again, that investigative committee did a lot of interviewing, a great deal of work, as Dave mentioned, on, seeing was there any way to substantiate the claims. And unfortunately, we found that the claims were escalated, that there was a lot of inconsistencies in that, and that was brought back to the partial board. At a point, I was chairing those partial board meetings, obviously because Nick was not there. And so the committee, again, found a great deal of inconsistencies, found that the accuser couldn't bring any substantial information to support the claims. And in fact, we found that the evidence that Nick was able to provide showed a great disparity. For example, even something as simple as who initiated who initiated the consensual relationship they were in. There was disagreement on that between the accuser and Nick, and Nick had evidence. There were multiple witnesses that proved that, in fact, she had initiated the relationship, which, doesn't prove one thing or another who initiates a relationship, but the fact that that was not, we'd not been told the truth about that. So that was very impactful, and there were many inconsistencies like that. So as we move forward, I think, Dave, do you want to mention a little bit about kind of where we got to at the end of since you were part of that committee? You want to mention kind of the findings?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Mhm.
First of all, I'd like to say that, any victim of sexual abuse, any victim of sexual assault, my heart goes out to you. And the People's Party stands wholeheartedly against any type of action in this. At the same level, we also want to make sure that we have a fair, transparent, and democratic process that relays information that is, if somebody, for whatever reason, has inappropriate behavior, we will investigate that as an organization. And we will have a free and fair process that will review all of that evidence. We do not cancel people with unsubstantiated evidence. Unfortunately, in the case of this accusation, we could not substantiate any of those allegations. In fact, to the contrary, we found 25 inconsistencies in testimony, and then later testimony, which actually contradicted the previous testimony that was brought to us, which could be understandable. I'm a sympathetic human being. Maybe you see things in a moment of shock, and on reflection, you have complementary information that could be brought to you, that could be brought to evidence. Perfectly fine. Unfortunately, in this case, not only was the original information that was presented to us, and we did a number of interviews. We did a personal interview with Nick. We did a personal interview with the accuser. We took both of those and we compiled them. We said, do you have any digital communications? Do you have any conversations? Do you have anything that could potentially be misinterpreted, both in your defense and potentially, to debunk some of those ideas? Well, what happened is we had a treasure trove of information that was provided to us by Nick, including deeply personal communications over a period that spanned months. In all of those communications, we did not find any level of intimidation, harassment, aggression. We can also conclude that Nick has never been accused of anything like this before. And due to the nature of the accusation that was levied against him, this is something that we were specifically looking for. Is there a pattern of behavior that we should be watching out for? That wasn't presented to us, nor were any of the claims able to be substantiated. Unfortunately, several weeks after the original deposition from the accuser came out, we were presented with now a new and revised accusation, which escalated to the level of criminal charges. That in the first case, we could not substantiate the original accusation, and when we were presented with the second accusation, there were inconsistencies between those two. And unfortunately, the Special Investigative Committee had noted 25 inconsistencies just in testimony, and that's without follow-up. Now, when we followed up with the accuser, she was not able to provide any digital communications. She was not able to provide any substantiated first-person witness account of what had happened. And that left us in a very serious position that we, without substantiation, could not accuse somebody of committing something as heinous as was accused without a substantiated claim. So unfortunately, we came to the conclusion in early January, and this was actually the 2nd of January, where we were wrapping up the investigation, and we decided that we wanted to go and put an end to the process that we were investigating, as we could not substantiate any of those claims. We had been in contact together with the accuser, by the way, who we approved as a board to be a member of our organization, paid staff, to see if we could have some sort of remediation with her, to see that if we could come to a general conclusion that would allow her to remain in the organization together with us. And we were in the mitigation strategy at that point with her, that she would not lose space, that she could remain with us, that we had understanding for her situation. And she had also expressed a willingness to continue together with us. So from there, we went through multiple scenarios where she could stay, Nick could stay, and everybody would be happy. Unfortunately, it didn't end that way. And the reason it didn't end that way was because there were political motives behind the entire accusation in the first place. We'll discuss that later, but essentially, it was a very unfortunate situation. I feel bad for all involved. In no way or another do I want to go and discredit anyone through this process, but the end point is that we could not substantiate any of the claims that were presented to us as a special investigative committee. Thank you.
Michelle, what happened after the investigation found that there was no evidence to back up the claims?
We had discussed as the partial board and the investigative committee had created a set of recommendations. As Dave mentioned, at the time, the accuser was wanting to stay with the organization, was wanting to continue the work that she did as a contractor with the organization. And as Dave mentioned, Nick would be chair, we would all be working together. So we came up with some recommendations to make that possible. For example, so she would be comfortable if, because obviously this whole situation had happened, even though the claims could not be substantiated, nonetheless, to make her feel comfortable still having an environment where we're all volunteering together, or most of us are volunteers, or in the case of the contractors, that we could still do the work of building a party, which we all were endeavoring to do together. So we had a list of recommendations for things like to make things, to make that possible. And as we were going through the process of discussing that and getting ready to present that information, that's when we, unfortunately, as Dave mentioned, we actually also had a situation that started to unfold with some of the former board members. I mentioned the one person who had reached out to me to mention that we were needing to have this meeting of the partial board without Nick present once the claim was initially presented. On that very first time that that person contacted me about that meeting, that was a couple days after my dad had passed, when we discussed that on the phone, this former board member said from the moment that first call that he thought that Nick needed to be removed as chair, just for the fact that there was an accusation, regardless of even before anything was even investigated or discussed. In fact, the same former board member had approached me previously 2 other times about removing Nick as chair. And when that former board member spoke to me about this upcoming meeting where we created that investigative committee, and he said, well, we need to remove Nick as chair. I said, well, who would do that work? Who would we see, if they want to be or run for chair, or who could run for chair or be chair? And that former board member said, that he would be, quote, a natural choice. It was something he was interested in doing. So, which I thought was a bit strange at the time, but, you know, and then we went through the whole process, as we mentioned before, about the investigation and all that stuff. But so over this time, there were a lot of other things happening. One of the things in the organization, we were setting up our National Organizing Committee, which is a body that was meeting to do our charter and our bylaws for the party, and that had delegates from different states, like Sabria here. And during that time, we were discussing many different foundational sort of like principles of the party. A lot of different things came up, a lot of different ideas came up, and there was, it became more and more apparent over time that there was a big difference in political leanings of some of the folks involved, as far as, you know, wanting to, again, like have Democrats be able to sit, you know, folks who were still involved with the Democratic Party, sit in positions of leadership in the state parties and things like that in the future, which, you know, which was voted down in our National Organizing Committee overwhelmingly by the other delegates. But unfortunately, some of the folks, those former board members and the paid contractors, were very unhappy when that was voted down, and we started seeing some other things going on where they were trying to expand the scope of the investigation far beyond anything to do with sexual harassment. There was talk by these folks of having, you know, removing some of those delegates that had, you know, disagreed with them, basically, with the same ones that agreed with that they wanted to have, you know, Democrats sitting on the board, and that was just one of the examples. But it became really a strange kind of scenario, watching what it appeared to me to be very ulterior motives involved with wanting to expand the investigation again, which we'd already come to conclusions. We had the recommendations for making a situation that would work for everyone, with the accuser and everything. And then suddenly there were folks who were trying to expand way beyond that scope. And then also bringing many decisions that would be the larger board, the full board, which was still functioning at the time, for anything outside of the scope of the investigation, obviously, trying to bring all kinds of other decisions to the partial board. It was a really strange scenario to watch. I don't know, Dave, did you want to weigh in on that as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was like opposite day, because, you know, suddenly what we have two boards that are working independently of each other. Another point that came out after we concluded our investigation into the sexual misconduct or sexual assault or any of the other charges that were brought up against Nick, when those were concluded as unsubstantiated, we found ourselves in a position as a board, unfortunately, where we had literally no control and no input under the activities of people who are financially contracted. And mind you, this was a decision by the board. This was not a decision by Nick. This wasn't a decision by me. This was a decision by the entire board to hire individuals to improve our penetration in social media, to improve our ability to go and vet candidates and coach them through this process. These were very serious positions where we need professionals that, let's be honest about it, you know, we're well-intentioned individuals, but we're just board members. We need specialists. We have to go and talk about the law. We have to go and get a lawyer. And, you know, unfortunately, the way these things work is, you know, there is no one view of the law. We needed multiple legal advice from multiple attorneys to be able to come even just to the conclusion that we had to investigate this. And when we came to the investigation part of this, that was a dilemma within the party, because what had happened effectively is we had two boards that were operating independent of each other. And as Michelle quite accurately pointed out, this was at the point that we had the National Organizing Committee, which is going to be the governing body of the party through elected state representation, which has always been our goal. Our goal from the beginning of the inception of the People's Party is that we have an elected body of representatives of states, of parties in those states that hold a position of authority within the party. It became very apparent to myself and to one of my fellow investigators on the investigative committee that that process was being intentionally delayed, that there were extra agendas being thrown into the charter that we had not approved as a board, and that essentially our entire democratic process was being derailed. And this wasn't happening just through the representation of the board, but this was also happening in collusion with paid contractors, which required, unfortunately, a separate investigation. And I'll get to that later on if you want to go and discuss that. But this is unfortunately the situation that prevailed. Just to give you a quick idea of what we're talking about here, I was not allowed to communicate with media and messaging. This is the core of our party. We make political decisions with our constituency that's reflected back in board decisions that approve that, and that goes back to media and messaging, which is supposed to be the voice of the People's Party. We had no input in that. We had no oversight over that process. And to me, this was an unacceptable situation. And to make it worse, we had already concluded our investigation. Suddenly, certain members of the board decided to go and create a new goalpost that was outside of our scope of investigation. That's at the point that I literally said, I cannot continue with this process, as we have already acquitted the individual in question. And if there were to be legal charges brought against him, that is outside of my scope. We had done our job as a board. We had done our job as a party to investigate thoroughly. By the way, we didn't have Christmas. We didn't have New Year's. We didn't have, Michelle's dad passed away, and she bravely joined together in this entire process to oversee, to make sure that we were doing it the right way. We had legal counsel that was going through his own personal dilemmas during this, and we all took this seriously. We all took these accusations serious as a heart attack, because if it was true that these actions had actually occurred, believe me, we would not be having Nick Brana on this call today. But we do have Nick Brana on this call today because those accusations could not be substantiated through any shred of evidence that was presented to us as a special investigative committee. And I really want to drive that home. If that wasn't the case, if they could be substantiated, we would be having a completely different conversation right now. Thank you. That's my time.
Nick, what were the lessons that were learned?
Well, I mean, to start, I want to say that sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, those are horrible actions, horrible violations of women that no organization should tolerate. And that's why I personally investigated when there have been 2 accusations in the past in the organization, and I personally investigated both of them. And in the case where there was substantial evidence that someone had in fact sexually harassed others, I recommended that that volunteer be removed, and that volunteer was removed. And so that's the seriousness with which I've treated accusations like this before, because I don't believe that anyone, man or woman, should have to work or in an environment where they feel like they're sexually harassed, and certainly not where they feel like they could be sexually assaulted. Those are strictly prohibited by our policies as a party and have always been. I also want to say that most accusations are true. I know I have, that whether it's sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, most women do not make up claims such as this. And that's why it is so important, on top of how violating it is, that these claims be thoroughly investigated and treated very seriously. And that's the commitment that I've had at the organization in the past. But I do want to say that, of course, I made mistakes, and I want to speaking very personally. This, this work can be difficult. It can be very stressful. It can be very intensive. The role that I've had since for the last 5 years in the People's Party, in helping to lead the organization. And I mean, through that time, I haven't had very much the opportunity. I've foregone the opportunity to really develop relationships because I've been so committed to the work here. But I have a number of friends in our political work, some of whom are allies of ours, who are very fortunate to have partners who work with them, who share the work with them, and who have the same beliefs, who are in the movement. And and in truth, those are things that sometimes I wish I had. And so when I met this individual, at first, my first impulse was, when they expressed interest in being with me, or when they expressed interest in being intimate with me, my first impulse was that you should not, of course, engage as someone else who is working with the party. But when the individual made further advances, I did eventually end up consenting to be in a relationship with her. And that, I have to say, it was a mistake. It was a big mistake. I should never have done that. And I take responsibility for that. But what I did not do is I did not sexually harass or sexually assault or rape her. Actually, I had cared for her. And so the way that everything unfolded was very sad to me. But I believe that we've grown as an organization. I know that I've grown personally through it, and that we have policies that will make sure that we don't encounter such a situation again, and that we do not have relationships, particularly among our leadership in the organization. So to the extent that I've had any responsibility for this, I take responsibility for that, and I apologize to all everyone in our leadership and our volunteers who have in any way been harmed by it, or who in any way have felt that it has detracted from our mission. I know that that people in a position such as me, who are trying to make change against the hurricane that is the system and the establishment, I know that there's often a lot of scrutiny, and there's often a lot of pressure. We're put under a microscope, and that oftentimes that results in a lot of, whether it's rumors or false accusations or smears or attacks. But of course, that doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it easier to face them or to handle them. Just to know that these kinds of things have been levied against others who tried to make change. So for my part, I want to say that I do bear that share of the responsibility, and for that, I want to apologize to everyone who has been affected and harmed in any way by it.
Okay. Would anybody else like to say anything while we close?
Yeah, I would just like to say one thing. On the other side, I also want to apologize to Nick, because through this investigation, we were brutal. We were brutal on Nick, to the point that I actually personally feel guilty about some of the lines of questioning that we took, that were very invasive, that were very personal, that I feel in some cases we're out of line. And I'm not going to justify my actions through this, but I also am a survivor of sexual assault, which is one of the reasons why I was selected to be on the Special Investigative Committee. And as a survivor of that, I had different insight. You know, my first inclination in this entire thing was to believe the accuser. You know, and she gave a plausible story. She made a plausible story. The story to me looked quite plausible. This could have happened. You know, this looked to me like something that is reminiscent of a sexual assault. I wasn't the only one on the investigative committee team that unfortunately has experienced sexual violence. So in our investigation, I believe that we were 3 times harder on Nick than we were on his accuser. Even so, the behavior, the communications, and I'm talking about hundreds of pages of communications that we had digitally between the accuser and Nick, literally minutes, hours after said events were supposed to happen, were not consistent with the behavior of somebody who had just suffered a sexual assault. We could not substantiate any of that. And that, to me, if I have to be completely honest about it, is a disservice to people who have actually suffered sexual assault. This is a disservice. Unfortunately, this also seems to be the go-to strategy of numerous political parties, including the Democrats, including the Republicans, including, you know, the duopoly that controls our country, that you can make an accusation against an individual, and as soon as that accusation comes up, as soon as you say those words, that person is dismissed from the organization, whether that is substantiated or not. I do not believe that the People's Party is that type of party. We have to substantiate any accusations, for good and for bad, to be able to hold our candidates accountable. If they can do this to the chair of the party, can you imagine what would happen to our congressional candidates that we're going to be launching? Can you imagine what would happen to our presidential candidates that we're going to be launching? This would be an absolute disservice to the American people. And unfortunately, 95% of all cases that go in front of federal courts are plea deals, which means that they are never even judged on the merits. It's just basically, if you fight the charge, then it's going to be worse for you. This is a disservice to democracy. We do not live in a democratic country. We live in a justice system that is completely broken. And we, as the People's Party, have the responsibility to investigate, maybe above and beyond what's required. Maybe we have to go and do that sometimes. But the reason we have to do that is because we have a broken justice system. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the entire world. We have more people in jail 2 to 1 than countries like Kazakhstan, China, Saudi Arabia. And nobody is going to say that these are shining examples of multi-party democracy. This is what we want for the country, but we also want to be able to hold our candidates and our leadership to the same standards. So for me personally, the purpose of this investigation was to come to the truth and to be able to substantiate or not substantiate the claims that were launched against Nick. We were not able to substantiate the claims that were brought against Nick. So that's the end of the story for me. The other ulterior motives for extending the investigation, for broadening the investigation, I personally spoke out for. I'm perfectly happy to go and share the memo that I sent to the entire board about that and to general counsel, which ultimately agreed in an agreement that there were ulterior motives behind this accusation, that there were ulterior motives behind the extension of the investigation. And this was detrimental not only to the party, but also called for the removal of democratically elected individuals from states recognized by the People's Party as representatives of the National Organizing Committee. That, to me, is something I would expect in my own country. I live in Brazil. We have political corruption. We have political coups that happen left, right, and sideways all across our continent. The only thing that holds us as a constitutional country at the moment are judicial and constitutional courts that hold the rights of the people. This is something that we are aspiring to create in the United States of America, and I stand behind that process 100%. Thank you. I pass.
I can attest to the fact that the investigation was very harsh and was very rigorously done. In fact, I wasn't even informed of what the actual charges against me were. I was just told that it involved perception of workplace issues, you know, and sexual harassment, which then of course escalated to sexual assault and even rape. And had I known initially, I could have provided the information from the onset that showed that in fact that was not the case. But I am glad that the other members of the board applied rigorous standards in investigating this, the kind that I have in the past, because I believe that no one in this organization should be exempt, whether at whatever level they may be working, should be exempt from being investigated and from having accusations that they bring forward treated very seriously. And so for that reason, I am grateful, despite having been at the end at the end of a very harsh investigation. I'm grateful that the process underwent that way.
Thank you, Nick.
I just have a couple of quick kind of closing thoughts here as well. I wanted to mention that once the allegations were made and all of this came to sort of a conclusion, we have been very mindful to not be the ones who, you know, released the accuser's name or spoke on this topic about it. We have been accused, unfortunately, of having done so, which we did not. Actually, some of the former board members went, and I believe the accuser as well, went and there was an article done, you know, that brought this to the public eye many months ago. And then we, you know, we had response at the time. And then more recently, as we've been showing progress, for example, working towards looking for a candidate, working for a candidate for a presidential race upcoming in 2024, as we had more information coming out about that, then the claims were made again, and the accuser actually came out publicly against us. And so we unfortunately have felt the need that we need to defend against this, because there's a lot of misinformation about this out there, which is very damaging to, you know, not only to Nick's you know, credit, or to his to him personally, but to the organization and all the work. There are so many volunteers that have put in an insane amount of hours over a long period of time. People that donate, you know, $10 a month or $5 a month or whatever, to helping build a People's Party, people that support or go to events. A lot of people involved here that everyone has a, you know, a right to know kind of more about this and what the truth is here. So it's been a disservice to watch all the misinformation lobbed against us. So a couple of just quick points. We've been accused of things like, you know, removing the entire investigative committee, which is absolutely untrue. As Dave mentioned, he was one of the members. There's, you know, other member that's still, you know, part of the People's Party that's not on this call today, or on this today, but you know, there were some of the former board members that were removed from the organization. A few of those who had not been attending meetings for months. And I mentioned that, you know, the former board member who reached out to me and I believe was intentionally trying to remove Nick as chair. You know, that situation was untenable, as Dave mentioned, that we ended up sort of at a point having almost like two boards that were in opposition, where it was taking nearly an hour to approve an agenda for a meeting because things have gotten very hostile. And I also just as an aside, when the investigative committee, when they were approached by a whistleblower, they were informed that unfortunately this scenario had played out almost identically, to a very uncanny degree. The accuser at a previous organization which she had worked with had made very similar claims against a board member in that organization, and had resulted in what basically a split board, you know, where there's two sort of opposing sides there. And it was, again, uncanny, all the different things that came to light about that from that whistleblower. That was very impactful for me.
Yeah.
At the time. And so I just wanted to put that kind of misinformation to bed there, and just mention that, and again, that coming out against us publicly more recently, that's something that probably will happen again. You know, anytime that, you know, any great work is being done, or we, you know, have something where folks can tell that we're still building, still growing, I think there'll be a chance that, you know, when we have candidates in the future, or whatever the action may be, it's something that I think, unfortunately, it is a tactic that is used to try to discredit and to stop us from, you know, trying to make change in the system, which is what we're here to do. So it's just kind of it's a fact of how these things work, that there have been many tactics to try to stop us from what we've been doing over the last 5 years. Like, so many different tactics have been used. So, but anyway, I just wanted to say that, I guess my last thing I'll say is that, again, I as an individual took a very real look at the situation about what I believed happened, didn't happen. And I absolutely believe that Nick is innocent of these charges, that he did not do this. And, you know, I'm not in someone else's head. I can't say with 100% certainty why someone makes a claim like that. But, you know, I have theories on sort of like what folks' motivations can be, and also motivations of those former board members. But nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that these are false accusations, and it's just time, in my opinion, that we just keep moving forward with the work we're trying to do, and folks are going to say what they say. So it's the last thing I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I just like in my closing statement to say that, yeah, this was a horrific situation for the party. It was a horrific situation for Nick. It was a horrific situation for the accuser, and it brought to light, unfortunately, deep faults that we had in our organization. If I can say anything positive about what came from this, I believe that we're in a better place than we were yesterday. I think that we are actually building a unified party at this point. I also believe that we are going to be able to hold anyone who runs with our party to higher standards, having been through this situation, having had to go through. This is not going to be a surprise for us if allegations get lodged against another individual, and this seems to be a tactic. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what Michelle was saying, and I'm going to be a little bit more blunt about this. This is a tactic that has been used sometimes legitimately, sometimes illegitimately. Either way, we have to hold people accountable, especially the people that we hold in leadership positions. We have to hold them accountable for their actions. That is 100% true. What we have learned through this entire investigative position is how and what we have to go and do in these situations. And I'd also like to say that we went above and beyond the legal recommendations. Now, in some cases, we made some very grave mistakes, and to that, I personally apologize to Nick, but we had to know. We had to know. None of us are expert investigators. None of us are three-letter agencies. We don't work for the police. We don't work for the district attorney. We don't work for the prosecution. We're normal people. We're normal people who just want to go and see this party go somewhere and go forward. And this is something that probably, unfortunately, is going to happen over and over again. There is a dirty trick tactic out there that they use against multiple candidates. And if you need any examples of that, I would just say, go and look at the Democratic Party. Go and look at how they do their investigations or non-investigations. No, we actually went there. We actually did this. Yeah. And we can be criticized on a number of levels in how we did this, but guess what? We came to the conclusions, we investigated the evidence, and we did our job legally. And then we went that step and above and beyond to be absolutely 100% sure that we were convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, in lack of any evidence being presented to us, that the claims that were launched against Nick Brana were unsubstantiated. So for that, Nick, I apologize to you, but we had to know. And I'm glad that we did, because now we know how that process works.
And I fully understand the obligations that you and Michelle and the board at the time had to investigate this and to take it very seriously. And as personally hard as it was for me to be accused of something that I hadn't done, and to have people in the organization, you know, wondering if I was capable or if I had done such a thing. Looking as hard as it continues to be to face these accusations in public, these false accusations, I'm glad and I'm grateful to be a part of an organization that took it so seriously, even when it came to someone such as its own chair of the organization, its own national chair of the organization. And I would have it no other way than to have had such a rigorous investigation that took it so seriously, because that's the standard that I'm proud that we hold ourselves to. That's the standard that I'm proud to hold myself to. And it makes me grateful to work with the people of this party every day.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Dave. If we have no other closing comments, then we can wrap up. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday. But these are things that we had to clarify. And have a great weekend.
Well, thank you, Sabria, for giving us the opportunity to clarify this. And yeah, I think it's been a great discussion. And thank you for
Absolutely.
being a
Thank you
wonderful
for coming.
host. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabria.